Hey, everybody. Okay, welcome to the Pro Church Marketing Podcast. My name is Jono, CEO here at Faithworks Marketing, and we help churches meet new people. And I am excited about having Mr. Tim Hall with me today with Sonimorphic, and we're going to be doing a podcast about why you should do a podcast as a pastor, as a church leader. So this is going to be good stuff. So Tim, thanks for being with me today, and it should be good stuff, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jono.
So tell me a little bit more about you and about what you do, a little bit of your story, why we should listen to you. I know why we should listen to you because I've learned about you and very impressive. But just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So I run a business called Sonimorphic, where I help ministries create engaging podcasts for their audiences as they follow Jesus. And so I got into podcasting back, I think it was early 2000s or so. Podcasting had just begun being a thing, and I listened to Adventures in Odyssey growing up, and they started having this Adventures in Odyssey podcast that was behind the scenes, what's going on with the show kind of a thing, and found out what sound designers did and was like, that sounds like a fantastic job. I want to do that. And so fast forward a few years, I went to college, majored in audio production, got to actually go to Focus on the Family, be an intern between my junior and senior year, and work on a few episodes of Adventures in Odyssey with the sound designers. Do a little Foley work for that was a lot of fun, as well as work on the podcast that I started listening to, and so I learned the ins and outs of podcast production there, and from there I was like, man, it'd be great to do sound design, work in podcasting, something of that nature. So soon after I left that internship and went back to college in the fall, I had come up with an idea. I should start a freelance business and maybe start to try and do this. And so I decided to call it Sonimorphic, which we were talking before we jumped on, that it's a combination. I was like, I should be creative with this and combine some words and make one that's cool. Well, maybe that wasn't the best choice, but the idea is sonic, sound, and then morphic, transform, metamorphic, that kind of a thing. And so smash those together to be Sonimorphic. Not necessarily the easiest to spell or to tell people, and for them to be recognizable. So, but here I am.
Well, you should try going by the name Jono. It's like Jono, Jonah, Juno. No, Jono. It's like Bono with a J. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, I feel your pain.
But yeah, so I've been doing, yeah. So I've been doing Sonimorphic now for almost a decade, and like I said, I help a bunch of ministries with their podcasts, and I most recently, so I'm doing it full time now, but most recently I was working at Ramsey Solutions, which is Dave Ramsey's company, and I got to work on the Entre Leadership podcast, which is their business and leadership podcast. Got to produce that for 4 of the 5 years that I was there, and got to edit it before that. And so, a little fun fact is that I got to work alongside Dave Ramsey, got to help transition the show that had been a interview-based show for business owners into a caller-driven show. And so we changed over to kind of the same format that the Ramsey show is, that business owners can call in with their questions and ask Dave, because he's been doing it for 30 plus years running his business. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
All right, sweet. So what is your favorite podcast? And that may be hard to answer.
My favorite podcast. So it is hard to answer, specifically because when you work in podcasting, and so I work on 12 different shows right now, and I review them all before they go to clients for their reviews. So I listen to those podcasts, and that doesn't leave a whole lot of time for listening to other podcasts. But when I do, I really enjoy The Pour Over, which is a news podcast. That's a short form podcast that's every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I've had Jason Woodruff that started that on my podcast, actually, and got to have a conversation with him about how that started. That was a lot of fun. But I listen to that one frequently. I'm also currently doing the Bible Recap, Terry Lee Cobble's plan. And so I'm way behind at this point, but I've been trying to keep up with that and just, keep doing a day at a time kind of a thing, even if it's not days next to each other. And I have to scroll back through my podcast app to get to the right episode. But listening to that one as well. And then let's see, is there any others that I've been listening to lately? And then other ones, it's been more so for research, as I either have guests on my podcast, Ministries that podcasts, or going on other folks' podcasts. So yeah, I think those are the two that come to mind.
Gotcha. Don't judge, but I'm going to be really unspiritual here. But I listen to a lot of true crime. Not going to lie.
Yeah.
My wife and I listen to so much true crime. It's probably like I've gotten to the place where, okay, for every true crime podcast I listen to, I need to listen to a sermon or a Bible recap episode. So just to balance it out, balance the murder with Jesus. Yeah, so we're so too much into true crime that we actually went to Crime Con. There's a whole convention about true crime like that. That's
you're in.
So pray for us. Yeah. So just pray for us. But all right, cool. Yeah. So let's jump into talking about podcasts for your ministry for the few that are still listening after they found out that I like true crime podcasts. So, the pastor or the church leader, the ministry leader I think it's probably been in the back of all of everybody's mind. It was mine for a long time. Like, yeah, I should do a podcast. Have other people saying you should do a podcast. But my pushback, and I'm sure a lot of other people's pushback, is there's a million podcasts already. Mine's not going to be that much different. I don't really know how to do it. I don't have that much to say. What would I even talk about? And why do we need another podcast? So what would you say to the leader that says that to you?
Yeah, I mean, so for some reason, that is a perception that podcasting gets, that the market's oversaturated. There's millions of podcasts. Why does there need to be another one? And then you see these big names that are doing it. It's like, I can't compete with them, or folks that have been doing it for decades. Like Dave Ramsey, for example, he's been doing it for 30 plus years. How am I going to even make a splash in this sea of podcasts? But in reality, there are millions of podcasts that have published episodes, but there's only a few 100,000 that are actually active, that have actually published an episode in the last 90 days. I can't remember exactly what the stat is off the top of my head, but Podcast Industry Insights, I think, is the website. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but they have a great rundown of like, this is actually how many podcasts are out there. And I've had that same thought of when I started my podcast, is like, do I really have something to add? And the answer is yes. For the same reason that you post on social, you have something to say, or you want to interact with people. Podcasting is another way to do that, and it's a way to build deeper connections with people. That's another thing too, is that while there's a ton of podcasts out there, you are building relationships with the people that are listening to you, and people will want to listen, specifically if you're already a pastor at a church or a ministry leader. You're already creating content of some nature to get the message out that, hey, this is what we're doing, or you're already doing Sunday sermons and other stuff within the church. And if nothing else, having a podcast will deepen the relationships that you're having with those people, because you're giving them the opportunity to spend more time with you. And so that's the thing that I always tell people. It's really not an oversaturated market, as much as people think that it is, or might say that it is. There's a lot of room for it to grow. Podcasting really isn't that old, and it still has a lot of room to grow, compared to, like, I can't remember what, again, I wish I should have had these stats in front of me, but they're comparing the number of podcasts to the number of YouTube channels. There's a huge number of YouTube channels compared to a number of podcasts. So it is different in that regard. And it's really, it's a neat medium in that it is more, it's more intimate than some of the other platforms, and that you're like, people are spending time with you in their ears, being part of conversations, and feeling like they get to know you because they're spending time with you. And that's how we build relationships with friends around us too.
That's a good point. Especially for a pastor of a church, once you've got a few hundred people coming on Sunday morning, I mean, no matter what, you really can only get close to 30, 40, 50 people. And that, I use the term close loosely. When I was a youth pastor, if there's 100 kids in the youth group, were tight with 20 or so. You knew everybody, but so for them to have that opportunity to get to know you, pull back the curtain, a more casual conversation where your pastor voice isn't turned on. There's a few TikTok accounts that I like that they mimic pastors as though the pastor's ordering food or he's on a date, but he's ordering his food in that pastor voice,
Yeah.
emphasizing what he wants to eat by,
Mm.
I'll have the cheeseburger. Yes, I'll have the cheeseburger. Like, because that's how we talk when we preach. And so on the podcast, it's a little more casual, especially if you're chatting with somebody, you're talking with one of your other staff members, and you're not performing quite as much. Not saying that pastors are just performance based, but you're not on a stage with a bunch of eyes on you, and it's just, yeah, I think it's a good opportunity for your people to get to know you and hear your heart a little bit better. And so, yeah, that's a really good point. And I would throw in there, I was pleasantly surprised because I was one that resisted doing it, and now I try not to pay too much attention to the metrics, but I do poke my head in there to the dashboard once a month at least, and I'm always like, oh wow, somebody's actually downloading this thing, and I had starting to have, especially as I've done it more consistently the past 6 months or so, getting on more calls with church leaders who are interested in what we do and saying, yeah, I listened to your podcast about church SEO 4 times and was taking notes. I'm like, really? Wow. Okay. That's so cool to hear, because I literally just thought maybe my mom was listening to this. So that, yeah, just go for it. Go for it.
Yeah.
That's pretty encouraging. So, other benefits that you see for pastors and ministry leaders to do the podcast, there's definitely the conversation. There's definitely get to know you. Other benefits.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple benefits, I'd say. I mean, one is a networking aspect. If you want to have a podcast and you're talking to other pastors and you're like, so this idea comes to mind. Actually, a client of mine that I'm working with, they're about to start a new campus, and the pastor that's going to be leading that campus has kind of joked about, hey, maybe I should have a podcast too. And I was like, why not have other pastors on that have started a new church with the questions that you have, and just ask them what you're thinking. I'm sure other people have those same questions. Like, just go for it. And so that's one way of just like, and then by having those other pastors on, you're building relationships with other people in your community that have done it, or other pastors across the country that have done it, and it just builds some camaraderie there. And then other people will listen in, and you'll start to build a community around it. And before you know it, you'll have more wisdom than you would have if you didn't start the podcast, or you would just be Googling around and asking a few people. But you can just broaden the ability to get more voices, because this is just how it is. For some reason, when people invite you to be on a podcast, they're like, oh yeah, that sounds like fun. I'd be honored to be on your podcast, kind of a thing. And so they would love to have a conversation with you, and specifically, helping another pastor further the kingdom by planning another church. That's a great idea. So that's one way to just like that it could play out in kind of a networking type situation. Another way that it could be used is for small groups. So you could take conversations that are there's multiple ways to do small groups. Obviously, you can go through books. You can just have discussions around the sermons from Sunday. You can have some curriculum like from Right Now Media, that kind of a thing. Or you can be like, okay, this is something that I'm noticing a lot. People are asking questions around this. Let's have I'll record a podcast and talk through these points and this is what the Bible says about this. And then I'll just tee up some questions at the end, and the small group leader can take that. The whole group can listen to the podcast, but then when they meet, the small group leader can take those questions that were asked in the podcast, which helps those folks that want to have the questions ahead of time. That then they can just ask those questions, and they can think through it, talk through it, and it kind of brings that community around podcasting. And I think that's a cool idea as well. And then there's just another benefit is as you're preparing for Sunday, there's so much more content and so much more research that is done than makes it to the 30 to 45-minute sermon on a Sunday. And so I've seen some other pastors here in Columbus that have a podcast that's literally them just talking through the stuff that didn't make the sermon and some other interesting things that they found, just some kind of commentary around the topic of Sunday. And it makes it more of a casual thing and be like, oh yeah, that's really cool that I didn't think about that. Or you just kind of bring some other stuff together. So there's a few different ways that you could go about doing it. Those are different formats, as well as, that could greatly benefit for you to have I'm doing all of this work, but then I have to cut a bunch of it out. Well, you could repurpose that content that you're cutting out and make it into a podcast and have a conversation with somebody else on your staff. You could have a conversation with somebody in your congregation and, get that they're interested, and you have them as a co-host, because it is a better experience frequently to have that be a conversation as opposed to maybe just having another podcast that somebody's talking at you. Not that there's anything wrong with those, obviously, but if that's what the Sunday Sermon podcast is, then make it something different.
It's a cool opportunity for just another connection with their church, with their people throughout the week.
Exactly.
People are busy, and when I was growing up, when I was in youth group, we had a midweek service. And a lot of youth groups and children's ministries still do that, but I know at a lot of churches I know of, there's not like the midweek prayer service or midweek discipleship classes and stuff, because everybody's busy. And so that's why there's a lot of just an hour on Sunday. That is the involvement in church. So the podcast gives pastors another chance to minister to their people. And I like that would be a cool idea. I would totally listen to my pastor comment on his sermon. One of my favorite podcasts that's not about murder is I've watched The West Wing probably 4 or 5 times all the way through. And there's a show called The West Wing Weekly. And every week, a couple of the stars from The West Wing talked through behind the scenes stuff about each episode. And they talked about the writing and some of the stuff, some of the things that went on set, and oh gosh, it was just awesome. And so to hear a pastor go through, here's what I was thinking and how I got to this, and I was going to say this but didn't have time, but I thought it was a good illustration. Or I would totally listen to that. So maybe a pastor should do that, because I don't know of any podcast. Maybe you do. I don't know of any pastors doing anything like that. That as far as talking through the behind the scene type thing. Or
there's one specifically that comes to mind. I can't remember what the name of it, but the church in Columbus here, where I live in Columbus, Ohio, is 514 Church, and they do a podcast like that the pastor just talks through what they're doing. What he was thinking through for the Sunday sermon. But I think it's a great format. It's similar to what the Bible Project does for their episodes, right? So they have a podcast and they have the videos, and the videos are taking a topic from the Bible or book. They went through all the books of the Bible, and now they're doing sections or topics, and they create a video that's 7-10 minutes long. That's super well done, super well produced, but it's a condensed version of whatever the passages were that make that up. And how they get there is that Tim Mackey and John Collins sit down and they process through all that. John's just asking Tim questions, and Tim's done all the research and knows he's the expert. And so John's just helping process through that so that then he can work with the team to distill that down. And in the top 10 of the religion and spirituality charts frequently, because people love to hear that. People love to hear other people talking about the Bible in a way that's not the same as a Sunday sermon. It seems conversational, because it's two people talking about it, and there's discovery along with that of like, oh wow, I never knew that. Or here's some historical context that I've this is literally the first time that I heard that this is what they did back in Bible times. I had no idea. So that gives context to give that so much more sense than I had. So it's a great format, like the kind of a commentary type format, or processing through and modeling for people how to have conversations about the Bible.
Yeah, I like it. Now, is there a podcast, and this is kind of a left field question, Is there a podcast that doesn't exist that you wish existed? If you could just force and create magically, this person or this organization would do a podcast about this. Is there one?
Oh, there's multiple. I've got a list.
Yeah.
So on my podcast, Ministries That Podcast, I do these how they could podcast episodes, and the whole point of those is, here's a ministry that's doing great work, and I really think that adding a podcast to their strategy would be super beneficial. So the first one that I did was He Gets Us. They have a huge media campaign. We ran ads in the Super Bowl, and have been doing ads in sporting events. Their goal is to spend, I think it's $1 billion over the course of, I can't remember if it was 3 years or something like
Yeah.
that.
And people were pretty rough on them about the Super Bowl commercials. Good grief, people, cut them some slack. They were just trying to tell people about Jesus.
And the thing is, they kind of accomplished what they set out to do, in that people are talking about it.
Yeah.
Like, if nothing else, people are talking about it. And so what I think would be great for them to do is to create a podcast that then gives people a next step. So they have next steps on their website. And one of them is, here's some Bible reading plans to start finding out what the Bible is about, who this Jesus is. And then they have, I think there's 3 things, and then one of them is you can get connected with an alpha group, which are basically like, I'm trying to figure out what good way to say it, but basically like for people that are intrigued or interested in Christianity, but don't know if they buy it, but but it's a place to go and have those conversations and feel like, okay, I can ask these hard, weird questions that I don't feel comfortable asking, a pastor about, or whatnot. So they're interested. It's a really cool idea, and kind of dives into some of that stuff. And so I think there'd be a great medium to take. Okay, we're already creating this media content. What's a way that we can give people a next step and help them dive just a little bit deeper into who Jesus is and what the Bible is and what Christianity is? And so I think that would be a great podcast. And they could, in that episode, I laid out several different formats that they could do for that show. But that's just one that comes to mind.
That's a good idea. I like it.
Yeah.
I would listen to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting from my perspective, as I'm part of my business is pitching people to start new podcasts. As I hear ministries that come up, or somebody's talking about a ministry, and look, and then I go Google them to see, do they have a podcast? Because I think they should have a podcast. it's just how my brain works. So there's a bunch of ministries out there that they're doing great work. They're already putting out content, usually in other forms as well. Might have a blog, might be doing some social content, and I think it'd be great to give people. The main thing with podcasting is building relationships, and how that's done is over time. So if you can give people the opportunity to spend time with you, you will create deeper fans. That's just the result of giving people more opportunity. You're going to make deeper relationships. So that's one that comes to mind. And I had talked about on my podcast because of it.
Very cool. Very cool. So the pastor that, or the ministry leader that, they've already got a lot going on. And I think this is a reason that I hesitated myself. I think this is a reason a lot of people hesitate to pull the trigger on this is, look, I've got a million things going on as it is. And here you are saying, I need to add one more thing. I've got a sermon to write. I've got people to counsel. I've got a building program going on. I don't have time for a podcast. Is the return on the investment worth the sacrifice that they would have to make with their time? And is it really as much as it seems? Do you think maybe they're overwhelmed by the idea unnecessarily?
Oh, I lost you.
Did we get a little bit of lag there? I don't know if my internet's going to
cut out for a second. I heard what's the ROI, and then it cut out.
Gotcha. So there, I'll start the question over again so we can edit that if we need to. I think it is my internet, but so you've got a pastor who's overwhelmed. He's already busy. He's got a million things going on. He's like, hey, you're telling me now I need to start another thing. I've got people to counsel. And so is the return on the investment really worth him making the time in his schedule or the time in her schedule to do a podcast? And is it really as overwhelming as maybe they think? Are they a little worried unnecessarily about the workload? What would you say?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely worth the investment if you do it for the right reason. If you're just like, hey, let's do another thing, like you're saying, there's really no reason to just add another thing. There's already enough things going on. So if it's something that you want to focus on and something that you're like, I'm passionate about, this is the idea that I have. You bring it up to other folks on your staff or friends that you're talking to, and they're like, yeah, I think you should do that. Then that would be a time to consider it and invest in it. And like we were saying, you can take content that's already being created, whether it's like that, what we were talking about with the pastor doing commentary around their sermon, taking stuff that you've already done, or already doing, if it's part of the process in what you do. I know some churches have a teaching team in which they have multiple pastors that are either preaching at multiple locations or that do a rotation of sorts, but they're all meeting together and having conversations about and studying through the same passage that are helping each other craft sermons. And if that's the case, I think it'd be fantastic to record those conversations, like literally just sit down and just record those. You're not doing anything more besides just hitting a record button. So there is a little bit of a barrier to entry, but it's pretty low. Like it's more so just getting decent microphones and getting a recorder to record that. If you're doing with multiple people, if it's just you can get a USB mic and just plug it into your computer and use something like we're using Riverside to record this conversation. You can use Riverside, plug your mic in, hit record, and go. And you get your files at the end. You can even edit it in Riverside if you wanted to. So there is if depending on how deep you want to get into it, it can be more work than you think. But really, just getting started is the main hurdle. That's what I found in starting my podcast. Is like I know what it takes to put out a podcast, and but I was like, do I have time to do this? I should do this. How should I go about it? And then it's like I need to just start it. And so there is some pieces that go into it as far as like, but a lot of it's the upfront stuff of like getting the equipment, figuring out where you're going to host your platform to get it out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the other places. And then once that's kind of set up, you can make it more complex beyond there of like, okay, let's record on video and publish it on YouTube. Or, hey, we'll record on video, but we're not going to publish the full thing on YouTube or something. We're going to just cut it for social clips and put that out to just build awareness. It's kind of the additional kind of marketing side of things that will take probably more of the time on the weekly basis. But if you're already having conversations that you can just record that what people would be interested in, just hit record and start capturing that. And then you can take it from there, build out, add the outro music or whatever you want to do for that. And I work with people all the time that are like, okay, how do I start a podcast? And walk them through that process. And once you kind of get through, it's then, all right, just record the next thing and get it and publish it out. So there is some work that goes into it. It's why so many I was talking about at the beginning, why there's so many podcasts that have published episodes but aren't current, haven't published in the last 90 days, because as we say in the podcast industry, there is a thing called pod fade that people will start and then it just kind of disappears. They publish a few episodes and then are like, I don't know if I'm as into this as I thought I was, or I'm not getting the results that I want to get. And really you have to, what I tell folks is that you have to be willing to invest at minimum, really, a year in your podcast to like see the traction that it's going to get. It's not like there's other content that you can create on other platforms that you can get more immediate, like, okay, this is actually taking traction. But podcasting is a little bit different in that you do need to give it time and you do need to be committed to it. And people can tell when you're committed to it and when you're not. Specifically when you show up with your frequency and when you're publishing episodes, but also in your tone of voice as you're talking. If you're like, oh, this is just another thing I'm doing, or if it's like, no, I'm really into this, and I want to make this podcast and build a community around it with folks. So I feel like I rambled a little bit there, Jono. Did I miss part of that question?
No, I think that's great. there's nothing worse than, and this has happened to me multiple times, getting into a podcast, finding one that I like. I can think of one right now that this just happened to me a couple of weeks ago. The other nerd thing that I like to nerd out on is presidential history. That I like to read presidential history books, and I like finding podcasts about presidents. There's not a whole lot of those. I found a really good one that was going through every president, and then it just stopped. And then about 6 months later, they would put one episode out. And these were good episodes. But I'm sure these guys had other things going on. But so it's been sporadic and inconsistent. So I get it. But one thing I do see a lot of people doing, and this is a little bit more of a true crime thing, but I would see that, I would think ministry leaders could do this, but they'll do a series. I mean, it's a 6 or 7, 8-part series about this one topic. Then you don't hear from them for a minute, but that topic in that series had a nice little bow tied around it, and you got everything. And then a couple months later, they have another series dealing with this other issue or topic or whatever. And so, I don't know, maybe pastors could do that. You could do a leadership thing and then a spiritual growth thing. I don't know. I would encourage guys to think outside the box.
Yeah, seasons are a great way to get into podcasting without being like, okay, I have to commit to publishing an episode every week
for the rest of my life. Yeah, it's exactly
that podcast that you're talking about with the president.
It's the same.
If they had said, "Hey, we're gonna do 10 presidents, and then we're gonna take a little break. We're gonna do some more research. We'll record more episodes, and we'll be back in Q3, and we'll do 10 more episodes or something like that." Then, as a listener, you're like, "Oh, okay, I know why they're taking a break." But yeah, when it's just going to stop, then you're like, "Oh, wait, what happened here?" So setting listener expectations is a huge thing, and doing seasons is a great way to get into podcasting and be like, "Okay, I have a lot of ideas that I could put into podcast episodes, a lot of conversations I could have. Let's distill that down into 8 to 12 episodes and write those out, and let's record those and put out a season, and then let's see what the feedback was. How did that go? And let's do another season." But that's a great way to do it. The one thing that I would caution is doing seasons specifically like you were talking about. It's not a bad idea. I just wouldn't say it's the best idea to take a specific topic and run through it for a season. And the reason I say that is because what's going to happen is you're basically going to be creating a bunch of different audiences that are tuning in for that specific topic. But then the next one, so like say the first one is like, okay, let's dive into marriage. Well, then all the people that aren't married might not want to listen to that. But then the next one is about creating deeper friendships with people and how to do that well. Okay, that more broadly applies. So if you do want to pick topics, do it in a way that includes a broad range of people that would listen to your podcast and not alienate part of your audience just because they're not in that point of life or something like that. So, and you don't have to do a topic. I would almost recommend, hey, let's take a set number of weeks and we're going to talk about these general topics. And, you might have an episode on marriage. You might have an episode on friendship. But you set that expectation of, hey, we're going to do this many episodes and then we'll figure out what we're going to do next and record the next thing. And that gives, like I'm saying, just gives the listener an expectation of what to know going forward. And they accept that. You can have a podcast that puts out one season a year. But if you know that going into it, then the anticipation is, you're waiting for the next season to come out. Similar to like when we used to watch TV shows and you had to wait for the day that it came out on TV. There's an anticipation. It's going to come out. You have that expectation. And then you're like, I'm so excited for the next season to come out, or I can't wait to find out what's happening on the next episode, that kind of a thing. So that's my thoughts around that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, if you're thinking about doing a podcast, you definitely should. But if the thing that's keeping you from taking that step is, oh my gosh, I don't know that I can do this forever, and then give yourself some breathing room. It's the same thing I learned when recruiting volunteers as a youth pastor, as a ministry leader. You're going to be recruiting volunteers. That's going to be half your job for the most part. And I learned really quick that I needed to tell people it was much easier to get them to agree to serve in our ministry if I said, hey, if I put an end date on it. They didn't always quit at the end, but if I said, hey, will you give me 1 semester? Will you give me 2 semesters? Will you give me a school year? To where they weren't thinking, all right, I'm committing to lead 7th grade guys for the next rest of my life. There was a light at the end of the tunnel in case they wanted an out and not have to feel guilty. Same way, say give yourself an out. Say, I'm going to do this during the school year, but I'm taking summers off, whatever. But do something, and don't wait to start until you have practiced and become this wonderful podcaster. Just you're going to get better. You look at some of the guys who have great podcasts or great YouTube channels. I think of like the big marketer Alex Hormozy. You look back at his first videos; they're awful. It was like with an iPhone 6 or something, and there's no editing, but he just did it and became really popular with not much production. Now his production is great now, but it was not always. It was some of the worst in the beginning. So Dr. Benjamin Hardy says, 80% done is way better than 100% perfect. Like, you're never going to get perfect. So just go ahead and be okay with 80% good and done.
Yeah, that's what caused me to not start my podcast sooner. Was like, do I actually know exactly what I want to talk about? I feel like I need to tweak it some more, or like, you just try and get it to be better than you just try and get it perfect, really. And it's like, you don't need to do that. Just you're gonna get better over time. That's just how it goes. So get started. Like, the best time to start it is now, and then you'll be at a dozen episodes sooner than you would be than if you didn't start. And I just published my 12th episode, and in there I was like, I hope I've gotten better over the past 12 episodes, but if nothing else, I've gotten started, and I should just keep getting better with every episode, having more conversations with people, and just start, and you'll get better over time. That's really, that and consistency are just 2 huge pieces.
It's like, as a pastor, if you go back and listen to, luckily my first messages weren't recorded, because they were definitely, who knows, but I go back and look at my sermon notes from when I was in my 20s versus now. Oh my gosh, I feel like I need to go back and apologize to everybody who ever heard me speak publicly, because it was terrible. And I'm sure if I go back and listen to the first podcast I did, I'd be like, oh my gosh, you sound like an idiot. But yeah, you just got to get started. So yeah, just go for it. And it'll evolve, it'll get better, and it may take a completely different direction, but you're never going to know until you take that step. So last question, more of a practical question, but the ministry leader that's not super techie, they've got somebody else doing their sermon slides on Sundays. They've got somebody else doing their website. But maybe they don't really have anybody to help them with a podcast. They don't have that teenager available to help them. And they're like, hey, I want to do this. What's the easiest way that someone who's not super techie could start a podcast inexpensively and easily tomorrow? What do they need to do? What are the things that they need to do to make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest thing is going to be to buy a USB microphone and plug it in your computer. That's the easiest thing to do, and then use a platform like we're using right now, Riverside, to schedule calls with people and record them. That's the easiest thing you can do. You will be spending maybe $100. You can obviously spend more than that on a microphone, but there's some good quality microphones that you can get for under $100. That like the Samsung Q2U is a really decent microphone that is less than $100. You can just plug it in your computer and start recording. And then if you're wanting to have in-person conversations, there's some other recorders to use, because you can't necessarily, there are ways maybe that you can plug in multiple USB mics to a computer to record, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing to figure out. And so you just get a hardware recorder. And so Zoom is a company that, not Zoom, the video conferencing Zoom, but Zoom that makes audio recorders. They have a bunch of great audio recorders, and they just came out with a new line of recorders that make it even simpler in that this is going to get techie on my side, but it makes it easier for the person that's recording. It basically they've developed some technology that allows you to not have to worry about how the gain knob. So if you've used a soundboard before, or if you've used a recorder before, you usually have to plug your mic in and then you set your gain, and you want to make sure that it's not clipping and it's not too quiet. Well, they've cut that out by the processing that they are able to do, and you literally just hit record, and then the only volume you're setting is to reference yourself, and it records it clean. And the technical stuff is it's got dual A to D converters, and it's recording in 32-bit float. So therefore, it has all of the information it needs to process. Well, it gets a lot detailed beyond that, but basically the answer there is you just hit what mics you want to hit record, and you hit the record button, and you don't really have to worry about it. And so that's fantastic for people that they don't want to, they're intimidated by looking at this thing. Like, I don't know what all these knobs and buttons do. That's something that was just announced. And so it's their essential line. So let's see, the Zoom H6 Essential, I think, is what the 4-track recorder is called, or 4-input recorder is called, that I recommended to a pastor here in town that's going to be starting their podcast. And so that it could be that simple of, let's plug the mics in and hit record, and you don't have to worry about some of the tech side of things. And so another thing that I've seen that's great and personally use is Descript. Descript is a way to edit your podcast via text. Basically, it ties the audio with the text, and you can just edit it right in there and export it from there if you want to. So that's a great tool. And Descript actually bought Squadcast, which is a similar thing to Riverside. So you could just get Descript. It's a subscription service, not super expensive. I think it's like $20 or less a month for the initial plan that you're doing. But then you can do similar. You plug your USB mic in, record everything, use Descript, edit it, publish it. If you wanted to do it yourself. But I would say, if you ask around, I bet there's somebody in your church that would be interested in helping you with it. There might be that teenager. There might be a volunteer that runs sound that would be interested in doing more stuff like that, but that's not what their 9-to-5 job is, that would love to help you out with that. So I would definitely say ask around. There will probably be somebody in your church that would be willing to help with that. Whether you're a pastor or if you're a ministry leader, ask around at your church if you're a ministry leader, and I'm sure there'll be somebody that would be interested in helping you get it started. Or if you want to take it to a next step beyond that, and you can work with a producer or somebody. What I do is Sonimorphic, and I walk people through the whole step, give gear recommendations, help them with the whole process of taking it from, hey, I have this idea for a podcast, to actually publishing your first episode about 3 months later. So there's the barrier, like we talked about before. The barrier entry is pretty low. It's just a matter of deciding to get started.
Yeah, 100%. That is super helpful. So if anybody wants to find you, if they want to get in touch with you, how do people find you, Tim?
So you can check out my podcast, Ministries That Podcast. You can just search for it on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts. And then you can also check out my website, and it's sonimorphic.com. And I'll let Jono put a link in the show notes so that you don't have to try and type that out. But sonimorphic.com. And if you're interested in pursuing working together on your podcast, you can click the book a call button, fill out your information, and we'll be in touch.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks so much, Tim. Everybody be sure to check out Ministries That Podcast, check out Sonimorphic, and reach out to Tim if you need some help with podcasting. If you're a church leader that needs help with some marketing, some Facebook ads, some Google ads, our team at Faithworks would love to talk to you about reaching new people. Yeah. And again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you again